it's been very rewarding to be able to help people get back on track and watch how they thrive when they're better.
It's a team that makes a difference. Like, rather than being watertight compartments, the team that thinks and works together makes a big difference.
Welcome to Season 3 of Broadcastability, a podcast by, for, and about people with disabilities.
Broadcastability is a Proud Project production based in Toronto, Canada. Visit theproudproject.ca to learn more. This podcast was recorded and produced on the traditional and ancestral territories of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, a treaty made between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to protect the resources of the Great Lakes and the surrounding areas. This podcast was also partially produced on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We also wish to acknowledge the Indigenous nations across Turtle Island, also known as North America, where we conduct our research and record this podcast. As a note to this episode, Chloë Atkins shares no personal connection to Dr. Harold Atkins. Their only relationship is as patient-doctor and their coincidentally shared surnames.
This is a unique episode in the history of Broadcastability. It's unique for a number of reasons. Firstly, it has a medical focus in that we speak to physicians about their work trying to cure autoimmune diseases. This does not mean that we're abandoning a social model of disability, but as someone with a disability, the quality of my medical care has an enormous effect on my everyday functioning. Therapies and medications influence how I feel physically and psychologically. I've found that healthcare, which listens to me and responds to my self-identified needs, allows me to live a more full existence with fewer side effects and complications. And so medicine matters, even as it does not define who I am. It can improve my functioning. Secondly, this episode is different because I have a personal stake in this interview, in that I've recently undergone a stem cell transplant with this medical team. I will quickly outline the context in which all this takes place. Last spring, in the spring of 2024, I learned that the procedures which had been keeping me alive for the last several years were no longer working. I have a rare autoimmune neuromuscular disease, myasthenia gravis, and my doctors told me that I had run out of treatment options. Fortunately, as a university professor, I had access to scholarly medical journals, and so I had read a paper authored by a medical research team in Ottawa that outlined the treatment of 7 patients with myasthenia who'd been cured with stem cell transplants. To be honest, I had long fantasized about the possibility of resetting my immune system. In my daydreams, I likened it to rebooting a computer when it malfunctioned. This metaphor has its limits, but the possibility of reconstructing my immune system so that it no longer attacked my neuromuscular processes was very alluring. Before we start, I should quickly describe a stem cell transplant, which is also known as a bone marrow transplant. In this procedure, clinicians focus on stem cells in the bone marrow, which are responsible for producing all types of blood cells and parts of the immune system. Stem cell transplant is usually used as a treatment for patients with blood cancers such as leukemia, lymphoma, and multiple myeloma. There are 2 types of stem cell transplants, autologous and allogenic. Autologous transplants use a patient's own stem cells found in their bone marrow, and allogenic transplants use stem cells from a matching donor. I underwent an autologous transplant, and so doctors harvested my own stem cells to give back to me after they destroyed my faulty immune system. The goal was to eliminate the flawed programming of my immune system. Doctors used chemotherapy and radiation to wipe out their system, and then they repopulated my body with my own stem cells. The hope is that the stem cells create a new immune system that no longer attacks my neuromuscular junction. I underwent the transplant this past winter. It's a lengthy process and one from which I am still recovering, but it seems to have worked as my myasthenic symptoms have either diminished or disappeared. In this episode, I interviewed the 3 physicians who oversaw my transplant. We're publishing the conversation because we want to share their perspectives on this little-known therapy for autoimmune diseases. These clinicians are Dr. Harold Atkins, an oncological hematologist, Dr. Carolina Rush, a neurologist who specializes in MS, and Dr. Santhosh Thyagu, a transplant hematologist. They all work at the University of Ottawa. Now, thirdly and finally, what's different about this episode is my co-host, my non-binary child, Zephyr. They were my primary caregiver through the transplant, which meant that they spent 5 months with me in Ottawa. They also helped me interview the medical team, which oversaw my autoimmune transplantation. So Zephyr, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Zephyr. I'm currently finishing a bachelor's degree in classics and early modern studies. I took time out of my degree to be Chloe's primary caregiver, and, as a result, I saw Dr. Atkins and Dr. Rush and Dr. Thyagu quite a bit, and I was greatly impressed with their care, and I was very interested in doing this interview and happy to facilitate it for Chloë and to get it out there.
My family was absolutely key in me getting through this transplantation, but also this medical team was obviously fundamental, and so now we're going to go ahead with the interview.
My name's Harold Atkins. I'm a transplant doctor at the Ottawa Hospital and the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute and the University of Ottawa. And I've been interested in transplants for autoimmune diseases for about 25 years now, and been able to get in on the ground floor, so to speak, and watch the field grow, both here in Ottawa and in other places around.
So I'm Carolina Rush. I was trained originally in Argentina, but came to Canada, had to redo my residency, and had I wanted to do MS my whole life, but slowly got into the field of MS and transplants, and slowly into autoimmune transplants rather than MS, other conditions, because of his mentorship and how passionate he was about how patients did. So slowly got involved in that, and sometimes patients come from out of town, so it's always good to when we can see patients together rather than coming to separate occasions. So that has been working very well.
My name is Santhosh Thyagu. I'm, like Harry said, a transplant physician and with the University of Ottawa. I recently joined this team. I come from Princess Margaret, Toronto. I've had an experience doing a stem cell transplant in a niche inherited disorder setting that gave me the joy of focusing on a small niche area within the broad field of bone marrow transplants. And I recognized how much of an unmet need is stem cell transplantation or cellular therapy in autoimmune disorders. And when there was a posting, I thought I could also apply. And fortunately for me, they took me in and I'm part of the team. I'm enjoying it.
It really struck me when you said in the middle of this, me getting a stem cell transplant, is you commented on how much certain autoimmune diseases, mine in particular, myasthenia, can impact patients and affect their education and stuff. And you were the first physician that I ever heard understand the contextual sort of effect that these diseases have. I think there's a sort of a view that you control them and people sort of live quite well controlled, but that in fact may not be the case. But I'd love to know what inspired you to go ahead and pursue this.
I guess when I trained to be a stem cell transplant physician, I was very interested in how you could do an allo transplant, a donor transplant, and show that you could change the patient's immune system to the donor type. And I wondered how that might affect other people using similar technology. So when I returned to Ottawa, my mentor had done a transplant for a patient with rheumatoid arthritis. And at that time, there weren't the therapeutic options that are available now. And they were quite unwell with rheumatoid arthritis. And after the transplant, most of their symptoms had gotten better. And I wondered if we could do a similar sort of thing. And I have to say, I wasn't the bright light that thought of this, but other groups around the world were starting to introduce the concept that maybe autologous transplant might be a good idea and help treat these resistant autoimmune diseases, and rheumatoid arthritis was the lead one at that time. And so I was encouraged to do that, and by my mentor, and worked with a rheumatologist here, and we devised a protocol and started to do transplants for rheumatoid arthritis.
What year was that?
So we would have started planning around 1996, 97, and we actually did the first transplant in 99.
Wow. And so in terms of doing the transplants, just tell it, you might, for an audience or for somebody who doesn't know, what's the difference between allo and auto transplant?
Yeah, so we can get hematopoietic stem cells from different sources. Autologous source means that we take it from the patient's own body. Allogeneic means that we get the stem cells from a donor. The donor could be a relative, so we call those a related donor transplant, or it could come from a volunteer bank, which we call unrelated donor transplants, or the stem cells could come from, for instance, a cord blood bank where they're harvested from the placenta and stored in a freezer until they're needed.
So I'm going to push you a little bit more, and that will open up to talking to these other two great individuals, is that how, in fact, did you create a context? You know, you had someone who was doing it. How did you create a climate in which it was accepted? We're in a public system. How did you get it pushed through in terms of all the bureaucracies and payment?
I think is because of the wonderful mentor that I had, who was the head of our transplant program here. So it was a different era, and there wasn't central control or watching over things. No one checked whether you were doing a transplant for leukemia or something else. Right. We weren't doing a large number of them at that time. And he was very supportive in pushing this ahead and giving me kind of the leeway to be able to start these studies.
So on that note, how did you've got a team of some sort. Can you talk about both the unit and physicians who are part of the team, or how you put it together and how this works?
Yeah, again, I don't think I did a lot. It's by evolution, and so I met colleagues along the way that have been interested and helpful and nice people to work with, and you start working together, and then you think, well, maybe we'll just work together more.
Right.
And we have the same interests, and we have the same philosophy of caring for patients, and that's really how the team came about, is by natural evolution.
So I'm going to ask Carolina, because you're a different specialty than these two transplant physicians. So from your perspective, how does that work, and how did you come into the team?
So MS, when I started practicing MS, the treatments for MS were not very effective. So you would see patients deteriorating over time with the very sort of precarious treatment that we had at the time. But then the transplant MS had made such a difference in patients' sort of journey with MS that was fascinating to see how these patients gone from very disabled to being almost normal again, and how we could sort of change their process with MS. And that's how I got sort of involved, just by probably coincidence in a way. And then right as the other conditions expanded, was also kind of, wow, sure, I'm happy to see these non-MS people, if you're seeing them, and kind of, as Harry said, it's, we work well together. And now with Santhosh also, I think Santhosh was a perfect sort of click in the last edition. We work very well together, and it's such a joy to work with these two.
So I'm intrigued. You guys, both of you do transplants for cancer patients as well. What I'm wondering is, how is it different treating a cancer patient with a stem cell transplant versus an autoimmune? It would strike me that it is a bit different, the experience of that, or am I wrong?
So basically, going one step back, autologous versus allogenic, it's not, as rightly said, it is the source from the same person versus a donor. But another element that comes there is the hammer, the intensity versus a cellular element. In autologous, what we are doing is we are using a bigger hammer. We are able to give high dose chemo to control the disease process in that lymphoma and rescuing the person by giving stem cells. So stem cells just rescue the person from death, because if you give very high chemo and you wash out the bone marrow, unless you repopulate, then hematopoiesis or blood formation cannot happen. So from that lens, autologous transplant is a big hammer. In autoimmune disease, we are not dealing with a malignant clone. So here what we are doing is we are eliminating the basic immune system that was acting against some part of the body, and then reintroducing the stem cells so that regenerates, and the regenerating or rebooting the immune system will not be angry towards those sites. So basically the amount of issues that deal in cancer, in treating a leukemia or a lymphoma patient with transplants, especially if it is an allogenic transplant, we are dealing with not just the blood counts going down and the immune deficiency, we are dealing with a lot of graft attacking the host and loss of the graft and all of those issues. So in that sense, transplants for autoimmune diseases are different in those senses.
And so is the experience for me getting the transplant, for me it was immediate. It's not immediate for a cancer patient, the sense of difference, or is it when they get the transplantation?
So usually when we see a cancer patient to do a transplant, they're in a remission, so their disease is controlled. Not always the case with patients with autoimmune disease. And so the treatment, the transplant treatment, often suppresses the immune system in a way that a lot of the autoimmune symptoms go away. Not everybody has that immediate improvement, but many of the patients do. It's a little bit dependent on which autoimmune disease and how active it is at the time of transplant and a number of other variables.
So what diseases can you treat with stem cell transplant that are autoimmune?
We've really had three major pillars. So we've had neurologic autoimmune diseases, we've had rheumatologic autoimmune diseases, and less commonly we've had gastrointestinal autoimmune diseases. And then we have a smattering of people with other unusual diseases that come to be assessed because their treating physician has run out of options. Most of our transplants are done for multiple sclerosis. The second most common indication is a disease called scleroderma, a rheumatologic one. But then we've treated a whole bunch of other rarer, less common autoimmune diseases.
And so when you're coming to assess, at what point, I guess what I'm wondering, if you have one of these diseases and you're listening to this, you sort of think, if and when would I be eligible? Am I literally on death's door? Am I totally non-functional? Wouldn't it be better if I'm well, relatively well, sort of as you say with cancer patients or remission? So how do you assess, and do you think what you do now might be different than might be in the future, or how do you arrive at when a patient is eligible?
Again, it was the most advanced patients that we saw at the beginning, the ones that had no other options. And again, as we gain experience and as the referring physicians become more comfortable with the side effect profile and the outcomes of these transplants, we've been able to treat patients earlier in their disease course. And there's advantages. So we see, people are not as damaged by their autoimmune disease. Their bodies are not as damaged. And so they don't get as many severe side effects on the whole. They can get through the transplant easier that way. And the outcomes tend to be better because you haven't selected for a group of patients probably that are resistant to everything. And so there's variability in where and how we select people. We prefer early. We don't always see patients at the time we prefer. And so we have to make a decision based on when the patient arrives to see us. And we do that. We have, again, that's why we have a multidisciplinary team with Dr. Rush, who provides us neurologic insight into the disease and helps us understand what causes the disease and how it's manifest and what damage it's done.
I was just wondering, if you're dealing with different diseases, do you bring on a consult? Dr. Rush is your neurological consult, but do you bring on a GI consult if you're doing GI things, or a rheumatoid consult if you're doing rheumatoid things?
Yeah, so just like I work with Dr. Rush, I have Dr. Maltez, who's a rheumatologist with us, and she and I do a similar sort of combined clinic where we both assess. It's not just me; it's Santhosh as well, where we both assess patients and decide together based on our conversations whether this is a good thing to do or a bad thing. And because those are the two most common, those are the doctors we interact with the most.
There are now all sorts of things for autoimmune diseases, in theory. And there's biologics. There's this, which not many people talk about. And frankly, I've put it out on a couple of myasthenia Facebook things just to, I don't know whether you're going to get some like little pokes as a result. And then you also have CAR T technology, which we can talk about. I'd love you, there's a range of things. What I'm sort of stunned by a little bit is how people don't know about this as an option. And it's, they're afraid of it, that they don't. So how is that, how do you guys, I mean, Santhosh is going to be, you're thinking of retiring at some point, Santhosh is going to be taking over, but how do you get your message out, in a sense, to the broader medical community as well as the patient community?
So patients don't have problems finding us. Physicians are more conservative, and I think some of them know, but many of them don't know, and that knowledge translation bit is the hardest part of the whole business, right? In the big picture, and we haven't quite got the answer to that.
So do you find that if you've got a patient who's done well and they've come from another center, does that usually open the lines of communication with that center who's now they've gone back to or looking after them?
Some. Sometimes that works.
So you're the person doing it largely in Canada. Where else is it being done in the world?
So we're doing the east. We see patients mainly from the eastern half of Canada. Right. The group in Calgary have a similar sort of setup, and they've done quite a few autoimmune disease transplants. I understand that there are smaller programs that are starting in different places, like Quebec City, right, and Winnipeg, and so the population is smaller, but when the need arises, they have the facilities. The United States has a number of centers. Again, they have issues with the way their healthcare system is structured in providing treatments that haven't been accepted into the mainstream. Maybe that's the best way to say. So most of their transplants are being done for scleroderma right now. But Europe has a very robust community. Italy, Sweden, England, lots of other centers around Europe have programs for transplants for autoimmune diseases.
As someone who's an autoimmune patient, the first thing I heard about was CAR T as being the new thing. Funny that. So there is a push because there are patents involved with CAR T technology. I've talked to a number of people who think it's great, like a couple of neurologists in Toronto are really behind this. It's an old technology in a sense, stem cell transplant. It's been around. You're obviously improving it every time you do it, but it's been around for a while compared to CAR T, and yet it's not as accepted, let's say, in many clinics as CAR T is.
Yeah, so I think part of it is that older physicians still feel transplant is a last-ditch kind of, oh my God. So there's a lot of that, whereas they don't see CAR T cells, so they don't understand the toxicities involved with that. Yeah, so I'm going to be a little bit cynical here. So CAR T cell trials are being pushed by big pharmaceutical companies who have billion-dollar research budgets, well, actually billion-dollar marketing budgets. And they have the staff to go out and push these things ahead. And based on success in one disease, which is lupus, they've decided as a field that every other autoimmune disease is going to be tested because they need a market that's bigger than lymphoma. And they make, I mean, the cheapest products are about somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 per patient.
And is that a one-off, or do they have to repeat it, patients with CAR T?
One knows. So far, it's a one-off, but, you know, the follow-up is now just a couple years for the first patients. So we don't know, and we don't know how well it works in other diseases, and we don't know the toxicity because there are so few patients right now that are highly selected to be, you know, to get through this. It's a good technology. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out. But there are competing technologies that will have to be, it'll have to be trialed against. Other B-cell depleting agents, monoclonal antibodies, BiTEs. But it's sexy because it's a cell therapy and it's a gene therapy. And so I think it gets a little cachet and a little pass from the medical community because of that. Transplant, you know, I use drugs that are probably 70 years old. They're off patent. You know, there's no big marketing budget. But we do know in the common indications that it works. It's a one-time thing for many patients.
Have you ever had to do it again for patients?
So yes, for 2 patients, we've tried it twice.
And do you have to go to allogenic, or do you? No,
we did autologous again. And it was a disease, an autoimmune disease where the outcomes are not the greatest, but it's better than the alternative. So in some autoimmune diseases, this is a really effective one-time treatment. In others, it's the best treatment that we have, and maybe need to look at alternatives.
If you're looking at a list in descending order, where is it most effective with to least in terms of just, off the top of your head and of autoimmune diseases?
Yeah, so the most effective, myasthenia.
I like that there.
I really like, we've seen a remarkable success in that group of individuals. Multiple sclerosis, if we get them at the right time.
And what's the right time? Early?
Before too much damage. Neuromyelitis optica, another rare kind of neurologic autoimmune disease. Those are probably the most where we've seen the best. We've seen good results in dermatomyositis, rheumatoid arthritis. Again, the patients that have come to us have been through all the autoimmune disease treatments. And so by the time they get to us, they have a lot of damage to their body. And so we can fix prevent new damage, but we don't fix the old damage with this. And so the results are good, but I think they'd be better if we saw patients after they failed 1 or 2 treatments rather than after they failed a dozen.
How do you get the message across to neurologists who are treating these types of diseases?
So so it's been very hard. Most neurologists, as a specialty, they're very conservative, and there's still a stigma. Why would you subject a young person to chemotherapy and all the side effects, infertility, if it's not a malignant disease? So there's still that sort of taboo that no, we should wait and try all the other pharmaceuticals. And also it's a bit, there's so much, as Harry was saying, about marketing, right? Oh, this is the new MS drug, should work, it's better than the other one. So you cycle from drug to drug, hoping that the next drug will work, but sometimes it doesn't, and you accrue disability because a new drug didn't help. So it's still very, push with pharma, with the newer treatments.
So, in other words, it's a hard slog.
It is, and as Harry was saying, we work with we try to break ground with certain groups, and we've been successful, but other big groups, they haven't, so it's still disjointed.
I mean, the patient groups, I can see a problem with that, even if you went to patient groups, is a lot of the patient groups are, in a sense, financed by big pharma. So, I don't know, and it is, to me, it seems a problem, and part why we're doing this, is that to try and make it more public that this is a possibility. It also seems to me fairly cost-effective.
For some diseases, for sure, it would, back of the envelope calculation would show that it's really much better at a much more cost-effective way of treating people. And, there are pros and cons. So, many of the MS patients still worry that their MS is going to come back.
Right.
And so that's always a concern in their mind. So that's something that now we have experience, we can tell them, here's what we would expect after a transplant. And it's not 100% cure rate, but we can outline how many people will have long-term disease control. But in the conversation, I think, again, you have to be cognizant of the long-term complications of transplant. And so we've seen, thyroid disease in our patients, and while that is maybe a less difficult problem to deal with than multiple sclerosis, it's still, is something to think about. But it's also the late complications that we think, late onset diseases of aging or prematurely. So, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease.
And they hit around what year usually after?
Well, it isn't like a defined thing, and we're just starting to get patients out that far to be able to understand what happens 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road. And it's so those issues, so we're fixing the here and now, which is, couldn't do that before, but what are the consequences down the road? And again, how can we mitigate those events? And so it's not, treat once and forget about your patient because they don't have disease, and they still need ongoing preventative care and watching to make sure that things are good. And it's not so, like, again, if your patient is 50 or 60, maybe those long-term problems are less important to them, or not.
Than if they were 40 or 30.
Or 20. So again, these are all kind of still questions a little bit.
What is patient satisfaction like from most autoimmune people who go through this? Does it take a while? Do they, over the years, do they start to Does the glow wear off, or does it improve? I'm wondering how that works, because that also will contribute to that knowledge translation.
Most of the patients have been very happy. So many patients have come reluctant, and they hem and haw and drag their feet, and then all of a sudden they have their transplant, and their myasthenia is gone, and then they're like converts. They're so glad that they had it done, although they were very reluctant at the beginning. And so where it works great. We've had it a very good run of things where people have gotten better. Their myasthenia has disappeared, and only one where the myasthenia hasn't gone away.
That must be such a puzzle.
We're still thinking that through, and again, how we play the immune system and how the immune system reconstitutes. It's a funny thing. So when these autoimmune diseases relapse, might not be the same disease, and we've had non-myasthenia patients that have had relapses that have been very easy to treat afterwards. And again, sometimes a one-time treatment puts them back into remission.
When you're saying one-time treatment, is that like a medication or
So an immune suppressant drug. And so you don't know if that's, well, did the redeveloping immune system have a little hiccup, and with time it settles down again, or again, it's so fascinating, and it just points to how little we know about how the immune system operates. We don't have great tools right yet.
So you still, even though it's worked well and I'm a convert, you're still on the cutting edge of what you know, right? You're sitting on the liminal edge.
So many questions.
What do you think the future of this is? Or, in its best form, what do you hope for it? Let's just say that. What do you think?
So I would pick up on from where Harry just said. The more we go into this, the more we realize that how little we know about these autoimmune disorders. And that also leads on to the question of transplant versus CAR-T, where the platform is that we know some things, but there's a lot of things that we do not know. And in CAR-T, it's more pointed towards a specific type of lymphocyte with the assumption that it is producing antibody, and this antibody is the thing that causes the disease. Whereas in transplant, it's a broader immune reconstitution. So I think the future is more bright because in CAR-T we do not know, it's just very new. How long will it last? Will there be the persistence of the T cells long enough? Do we need the persistence of T cells long enough? We do not know so many things, only time will tell us. But at least transplant, as Harry said, it started, like the first transplant that Harry did was in 1999, and we have got long-term, at least reasonably good long-term follow-up of these patients, and many of them have remained in remission for long enough. So I think the future is very bright for the transplant and a bit unknown from other domains. And as Dr. Rush said, so many new medications have come, but most of them have either tried to modify the manifestation of the disease or new medications to try to control the B cells or the lympho or the immune cells that produce the antibodies. And CAR-T is a big brother of that, whereas transplant is, as I said, is a broader immune reconstitution. So I think with better modalities or better supportive care and other things to do, and for example, for once, Harry was telling me about the choice, how to choose the right patient, especially in another disease called scleroderma, when that can affect the vasculature in the lungs, and people with what you call pulmonary hypertension, and how they can impact the outcome of the transplants. And before we recognize that some of the transplants were not very successful, ended up in a bad way, and then when we realized this is playing a big role in the transplant process, and when we started selecting patients based on the presence and the extent of pulmonary hypertension, outcomes became very safer. So the more we get to know things and more we are able to choose the right patient at the right time, I think the future of transplant is very bright.
So it really does matter how fit the patient is when they arrive for you, whether they'll make it through the process in some level.
The disease has an indication and the patient should be the right candidate. So the ideal disease which has a good indication plus the candidacy of the patient. So selection process, the right patient for the right disease for the right modality.
So it's not like we're trying to get into Harvard, but what's the percentage of people who come to you that you accept versus the ones you reject?
So I think my experience in autoimmune diseases is not the biggest, but from what I've learned from Harry and the team is that each disease has a certain sweet window where it's not too early or it's not too late that fixed events have happened which cannot be reversed. So in scleroderma, there are certain parameters where the disease is not too advanced that there is no benefit. In multiple sclerosis also, it's the relapsing remitting where there is active inflammation happening, whereas if it is the primary progressive or the secondary progressive where events have happened and now it's taking the deficits are becoming more, but inflammation has sort of settled down. Right. Those patients by reconstituting the immune system and resetting it doesn't help because the immune attack has already happened.
So you want to do it earlier in MS rather than later, in that sort of remitting part of MS. That's fascinating. And you've just learned that through just the process of what you're going through.
The earlier that you have MS, the easier or the more complete the recovery is. So the longer you have MS, the more chance that your deficit stay the same.
The damage is there.
Yes.
It's locked in already.
It's an active immune system that is attacking the site and causing damage. So as long as the activity of the immune system is the driver, you reconstitute the immune system and it is a more accepting, accommodating immune system, so further attacks don't happen. But if already the damages is all done and you're seeing the ongoing deficit, but active inflammation is not there, by reconstituting the immune system, you're not doing it. The bus has already left the station.
It's more than a doctor team that you've got. You've got multiple specialties. You've got a specialist. You guys talk a little bit about that and what role that plays in this.
It wouldn't be possible without the large team that we have assembled, and the team on the ward has mainly been assembled to treat patients going through transplants for leukemia or lymphoma or myeloma. Right. And they've got the special nursing skills to nurse patients. And, it's quite an intensive job because patients can get very sick. And even if they don't get sick, they're there for a long period of time. And I would have to say they're wonderful because they're so supportive and caring for the patients, and they get very attached. And sometimes, that's hard when the patient relapses or dies from a complication. And we also have a very good physiotherapist, and she's kind of provides a lot of enthusiasm up there to get people back on their feet. Great dietitian who helps provide advice and it gets people to eat when they don't really want to. The pharmacist, because we use a lot of drugs and so many of them interact and so many of them have narrow windows, so they've been an invaluable part of the team.
I also thought what was interesting is that you also have two other physicians who rotate to put out fires in some sense.
We have our clinical associates and physician assistants who do the day-to-day management of our patients and help care for all the needs of the patient. When there are so many little pieces of data that you need to look at every day, they take care of the things that need to be taken care of. Right. and that allows the more senior staff to kind of direct things and provide guidance to the bigger picture.
Was that difficult to set up, or was that not so difficult to set up?
In some ways, yes, because it's hard to find the right people who want to do that. It's a little easier now because younger physicians recognize this as a career path.
So one thing what Harry said was, as you asked him about how did you make it a big success and the amount of support he got from his mentor, the same thing I am experiencing is, like, if there is a hierarchy where there is a lot of psychological distance, then the program will not succeed. Here I have the freedom to ask him any stupid questions that I have, and he won't be judgmental. He will tell me what is where, and that sort of a freedom to ask questions and freedom to explore things and the collegiality. So the mentorship is something that's very important for new people to grow into that space.
If you wanted people to know something about what goes on here and what goes on in particular with autoimmune disease and transplantation, is there something you'd like to say? 'Cause
you can see how other people care for the patient, they're passionate, and you can see how, for sure, personality plays a role, but sometimes you have to negotiate and kind of, it's in the sense it's a bigger center, they have bigger, a hospital is more disjointed than here, right? That we're kind of closer, maybe like physically, so that also has helped, I think.
It's a team that makes a difference. Like, rather than being watertight compartments, the team that thinks and works together makes a big difference, because it's not like one can master or one can try to be efficient in multiple domains. So in neurology transplant, we do the transplant, Dr. Rush is always there, and she sees the patient on a daily basis. So if something is going down, the neurology domain, we can always depend on, we know that she would already have acted on that. If it's a transplant domain, that she could ask. So it's a team. I think the team is a big thing here.
Well, from a professional point of view, this was just the best thing ever, because you get to learn wonderful things about how the body works and doesn't work and how to fix it. And I get to learn from experts. I get to learn from Mindy about how neurology, never one of my strengths. I get to learn from Nancy rheumatologic issues. I learn from Santhosh because he knows so much about allo transplants. And so working so closely with people, you pick up, and you're always in a learning environment, which is always stimulating.
Absolutely.
And, it's such a, like they actually pay me to do that. It's like such a wonderful thing. From a patient perspective, it's been very rewarding to be able to help people get back on track and watch how they thrive when they're better. And sometimes there have been instances where patients come to me and I'm kind of skeptical about it, and they're very much their own advocates. And after reflection, we go ahead. And I've always learned from that situation as well. And I think keeping an open mind and keeping listening to everybody is a very important part of this whole endeavor.
We ended the interview on the topic of teamwork and mentorship. As someone who has had a lot of clinical contact, it was apparent that this team functions differently than most other hospital units. Usually, a hospitalized patient has one primary physician. And if another specialty is needed, in deference to professional roles and capacities, a consultant doctor visits and examines the patient and writes up a consulting note, which suggests possible therapies or treatments for the primary physician to undertake. That consulting clinician only returns if another problem emerges. The Ottawa Autoimmune Transplant team works differently and together. They see each other regularly. When I returned home after the transplant, one of my regular doctors asked me how often the neurologist saw me on the unit during the transplant process. When I told him every day, he was stunned and commented, "Wow, that is amazing." So Zeph, what do you make of our conversation and of the whole stem cell transplant?
I really liked doing this interview, and I'm glad that we're putting it out there. Firstly, I hope that hearing about this team's approach and hearing about this procedure proves useful to listeners who have autoimmune diseases, who have family or friends who have autoimmune diseases, or even if clinicians who treat autoimmune diseases hear this. I really hope that this helps them. Yeah, changes their perspective, helps them understand how this team is doing things. I also generally when I was a caregiver for you, when we were doing the transplant in the hospital, I felt like this team, I also felt like it felt very different to a lot of the other medical care that I've seen. The sort of physicians who were at the head of things, Dr. Atkins, Dr. Rush, Dr. Thyagu, they were very involved and very collaborative in a way that I hadn't seen. But I also want to sing the praises of the other attending physicians who were on that unit and the nurses who were very understanding of my role as a caregiver, I feel like, and I never felt dismissed or anything, because they never dismissed that I might have some kind of expertise or whatever. They would look to me, at least implicitly, to approve things or get my opinion on what was happening. And oftentimes I would approach it with I'm not a medical professional, I trust what you guys are doing. But feeling seen in that way, I think, was very important to me and really helped my experience there and my opinion of that team. So I really like doing this interview and putting it out there, even just to say, these guys are great, look at what they're doing.
I want to thank Drs. Harry Atkins, Carolina Rush, and Santhosh Thyagu for their time and for sharing their invaluable knowledge and insight about undertaking stem cell transplants for patients with autoimmune diseases.
This episode of Broadcastability was hosted by Chloë Atkins, a professor at the University of Toronto and an anti-ableist researcher. This episode was also edited by Larkuska. Isabel Abakumovich-Poynton created the artwork, and Justin Laurie composed the music. Broadcastability can be found on Apple Music and Spotify, and at broadcastability.ca. Broadcastability is a Proud Project production based in Toronto, Canada. Visit theproudproject.ca to learn more.